Authentication is the process of verifying identity in digital systems. So when you type your username and your password into a website, the system checks if those credentials match what's stored in its database. And if they match, then you're authenticated. The system is going to now trust that you are who you claim to be. It's a yes-no decision. Either you successfully prove your identity or you don't. The word actually comes from a Greek word, I think it's authentikos or something like that, meaning genuine or original. In computing, it answers one simple question: are you really who you say you are? And this is different from authorization, which asks, what are you allowed to do? A lot of people confuse those two terms. So authentication happens first, and it's just about establishing identity. Only after the system knows who you are can it really determine what you're permitted to have access to. So every digital interaction requiring identity verification, whether it's like unlocking your phone to access your email, it's going to involve some form of authentication. Now, before authentication, early computer systems were pretty much like libraries where anyone could just walk in, access everything, get what they wanted. I think the first computer passwords appeared at MIT in the early 1960s when multiple researchers started sharing the same machine, and they needed a way to keep their files separate and private. So without authentication, there's really no concept of ownership or privacy in a digital space. Everything would just be publicly accessible to everyone. Today, authentication solves three different problems, critical problems. So first, it enables privacy by ensuring only you can access your personal data. Second, it creates accountability, so actions can be traced back to specific users. And third, it allows personalization, so systems can remember your particular preferences and settings. And in automation tools, authentication solves an additional problem. It lets your workflows act on your behalf across lots of different services while still maintaining the security boundaries that are in place. So your in-app workflow can post to your Twitter account just because authentication proves that it has permission to represent you. In no-code automation, authentication occurs at specific connection points between your automation platform and whatever external service you're talking to. So every node in your workflow that touches some kind of outside service will, whether it's Slack, Gmail, Notion, whatever, it's going to require some kind of authentication to perform actions. And these connection points are just called integrations or nodes, and each one just needs proof that it's allowed to access that specific service on your behalf. And the authentication layer kind of sits between your automation logic and the external APIs. So when your workflow says send an email, the authentication layer is going to add its credentials to that request. So proving to Gmail that this request comes from an authorized source. And then in the end, you'll see there's credential drop-downs on the nodes, and these are the authentication checkpoints. So some workflows might have 5 different authentication points if they're connecting to 5 different services. Each service is going to maintain its own authentication independently. So that's why you might be connected to Slack in one instance and one node, but not yet to Discord with the same automation tool. Now, OAuth fundamentally changed authentication by introducing delegation. So instead of sharing passwords, OAuth creates a triangle of trust. You tell service A that it's okay for service B to access specific things, and service A gives service B a special limited access pass. So no passwords change hands when you click that connect with Google in NAN. You're not giving NAN your Google password. You're just telling Google to issue NAN a special permission slip, effectively. And the magic kind of happens through redirect flows and tokens in the background. Your automation tool is going to send you to the real Google login page, and after you authenticate directly with Google and approve the permissions, Google sends you back to your automation tool with a special code, effectively, and then your tool exchanges this code for access tokens behind the scenes. And these tokens are very narrow in scope, so maybe they're just like read-only access to your calendar, not your entire Google account. And if you revoke that access later, you would do it from Google's security settings, and that's just going to invalidate those tokens straight away. So OAuth kind of turns authentication from all or nothing password handover into a much more granular permission system. Digital authentication isn't permanent in general. It usually expires by design. So access tokens typically last anywhere from an hour to 90 days, sometimes more, sometimes less. Depends on the service and the security requirements you have. So this isn't a flaw though, it is a security feature. If someone steals an expired token, it's worthless. So you can think of it kind of like a parking meter. You need to go back and refresh periodically to maintain your access or your permission. In automation context, token expiration creates a bit of a challenge. You know, your workflows are going to run unattended, so they can't prompt you to re-log in when tokens expire every time. So that's where refresh tokens come in. So when you first authenticate, a lot of services provide the access token for immediate use, and then they'll also provide a refresh token at the same time for getting either new access tokens or just refreshing it there. So your automation platform uses that refresh token to just silently obtain a new access token before the old ones expire. And in this happens automatically for most OAuth connections. You might authenticate once and have your workflow run for a really long time without any intervention, thanks to this kind of refresh cycle just happening invisibly in the background for you. Creating credentials in NAN follows a pretty predictable pattern. You navigate to credentials in the left menu, you click add credential, you choose your service type, and then the form that appears is customized for the specific service's authentication method. So for API key authentication, you'll see a field where you paste the key. For OAuth services, you'll see a connect button that's going to launch the authorization flow. Most services provide their API keys in like a separate developer portal or developer settings. Like in Stripe, I think it's under developers API keys, but in something like SendGrid, it's settings API keys. Generally, it's called API keys. In credential forms often include the direct links where you'll find these keys. And so after pasting in your credentials, you can always click the test button to verify the authentication works. You'll usually do that when you hit save anyway, before you use it in workflows. So once it is saved though, these credentials are going to be available in the drop-down menus for future nodes. So whenever you add a new node for that service, you can just select it. You don't have to add it each time. And you can create multiple credentials for the same service if you want, and that's quite useful for separating like test and production environments or managing different accounts. Authentication errors in automations also follow pretty similar patterns. So HTTP 401 responses mean that your credentials are invalid. So either they're typed wrong, maybe they're expired, or they've been revoked. So you want to also check for extra spaces when copying API keys and verify that the key hasn't been regenerated on the service's end. HTTP 403 means the authentication succeeded, but the authorization failed. So your credentials work, but they lack the permission for that specific action. So you want to review the API keys permission scopes or possibly the OAuth consent screen. Connection timeout errors often indicate firewall network issues rather than authentication problems. And then rate limit errors, which is usually HTTP 429, mean you're authenticated, but you're exceeding your usage quotas. So in the execution log for NAN, the authentication errors appear whenever a node runs. So the error messages usually specify exactly what failed. So for OAuth connections showing something like invalid grant errors, the refresh token has probably expired. You want to manually reconnect through the credentials page in that case. And most authentication issues you resolve by just regenerating the credentials on the server side and then just updating them in NAN or your automation platform. But whenever you're in doubt, just delete, recreate the credential entirely for a fresh start.